a short summary of what you've done, and it includes everything basically in that short summary. And you have to check carefully the journal that you're sending your papers or your article to about how long an abstract can be. Sometimes it's 500 words, sometimes it's 200 words. And I would advise you as well, that's what I had on my PowerPoint somewhere at the end, but if you start writing an article and then well, you have done research, you have a message, a research question, all those kind of things, but think about the article where you want to publish it. So think about, okay, what is the most likely audience that I will reach? We had some pretty big discussions back home about that, because it was all about impact factors, Q1, Q4, Q3, Q2, whatever. I think personally, if you write an article and you want it published, then okay, you want to have a good journal, of course. But I think it's much more important to reach the audience that you want to reach, because basically writing an article is about reproducibility of research endeavors, but also trying to get your knowledge across the audience you want to bring across. So for instance, if I write an article about motor development in children, I don't send it to the journal of astrophysics to mention, although that might be a journal that is pretty high up with the impact factor. So if you start writing, I would recommend, if you're in the beginning, you also read a lot of articles, of course, to know, okay, what's already there in the literature, and then also scan the literature that you've read about, okay, where are these articles published? Because that sometimes helps, that you know, okay, there's probably I should send it to that journal as well. There's also different tools where you can. I think one is called Genie by memory, and you can actually put your abstract in there, and then you can say scan for journals, and then it comes up with a whole list of journals, the best ones on top, or the best ones, the most likely ones on top, and then it goes all the way down. So that's important to know. Okay, I'll just go from that. So are there any questions so far? This is very good, by the way.
Any questions? Maybe how to make an interesting title, or how to find appropriate journals for our paper?
So maybe I can ask you a question. So do you start with the, if you write an article, do you start with the introduction, or do you start with the title? So who's starting with the title? No. Okay. Who's starting with the introduction? Must be. Who's starting anyway? Methods. Okay. Yeah, that's a good one. So I'll think a little bit for my problem. It doesn't matter. So if you start, methods. I think the methods are probably. I don't know, but probably the easiest part of the article, because it's pretty standard and also important, to be honest. Because you just have to, it's all about reproducibility. So you have to write down, okay, what did you do, how did you get your participants, how many trials did you run if you do experimental work or clinical work, etc. So that's a good way to start. But then, one way or another, you have to write an introduction as well. And so I always say to my PhD students, the introduction is probably the most important part, but also the most difficult part. Yeah, it's really difficult.
Longest time.
It takes a long time, and it sounds a bit obnoxious, a word for it. So I published quite a few articles, but still, I'm always struggling when I open my laptop and I think, okay, let's start with a nice article, and then I have to write the introduction, and I'm like, okay, so what will the first line be? So that's it's something. What I sometimes do is just put on very loud music and just go with the flow. Sometimes that helps. Maybe a good coffee will help. All those kind of things. But you have to think of the introduction as a sort of there's different ways in which you can start an introduction. So the most important things are, of course, you have to have a theoretical framework, or at least you have to scan the literature about the knowledge that is already there, and what is the extra knowledge that you're providing the scientific arena with your research. Oh, hold on. Someone's chasing the dog. Thank you. All right. Going to start over. No, I'll just let's see where we are. Skip this. Okay, so this is what I already said. Okay, so abstract is basically, I didn't talk a little bit about it, but it's basically your article in the national. I don't know, just a question, because that's sometimes what I ask my students, master students, then they come up with they have to write a thesis. And I had, last time I had a group of 10 students, I think there was one student who she was so good, she wrote a whole thesis during Christmas break. So she called, or she texted me, or she mailed me, they don't text me, she mailed me afterwards, she said, you know, I'm finished. And I was like, oh, that's quick. Yeah, she said, but I didn't have anything to do with Christmas break, so I just went for it and this and that. And then I read it, and I thought, oh, that's a good piece of work. So I asked her, because I know that some students are faculty do that, I said, how much AI is involved in this? And I could read that there was not, well, as far as I can know, there was not much involved. But she said, and that's also a good lesson, I think, for writing articles, and that's what I always do. She said, well, you know what, I just sat down, I wrote it, and then I had it sort of proofread by a couple of others. And a couple of others were fellow students, so that know a little bit about the topic, which is always good because they can say, okay, the argument, the flow of the argument is okay or not. But she said, that was really funny, she said, but I also had my mom read it, and it's in Dutch, and her mom could understand it. And I'm always like, I mean, scientific articles are, of course, different than novels or narratives or whatever, but it has to be, how do you say it? I always say you have to take the read. This is a Dutch expression, by the way, so it's a very bad translation, I guess, but you have to take the reader by the arm and lead them through the article. So basically, it's just like a movie script. So you have to tell enough that they're interested to read the next line, but just not enough that they know the whole thing. Know what I'm saying? So you have to sort of attract their attention and keep their attention. And that's also with an article. You have to sort of build attention. It sounds a bit strange maybe for a scientific article, but you have to get to a certain point, and a certain point is basically your research question and your hypothesis, or hypothesis. Depends on what you want to find out. So, any questions about that? I just often say any question because but with respect to the introduction, so there's different ways in which you can actually write an introduction. You can make it a sort of a narrative. So I just give some examples, just for you to sort of get it in your mind. So some people start with a narrative, sort of anecdotes, like we sometimes start, so maybe we have some examples for myself, like it's not really an anecdote, but people are getting more inactive in the last 15 years. And that sort of sets the stage for the rest of your article, because then this article is all about inactivity and how we can promote that people become more active, those things. You can also start with a theoretical framework. So say based on this theory, I would, we know that this and this and this, but there's still a knowledge gap. That's the thing you don't look in that article. And the knowledge gap relates to this and that. And our research question is basically in that knowledge gap. And our hypothesis is this and that. You can do whatever. Sometimes they say, well, you have to see the introduction as a sort of a shape. You can make it a U shape, so like this. So you start very broad here, and then you narrow it down to your here. So this is I'll have to explain. So this is the start of your introduction, so on top, and you basically narrow it down to the bottom where my thumbs are, and that's where your research question and your hypotheses are. That's one way. You can also say, I start very narrow, with a very narrow, small thing. I broaden it up, and then I narrow it down. And there's heaps of different forms in which you can write your introduction. I think the most important thing with the introduction is that you need to have a good flow. So you need to build up the argument. And I don't have a sort of a golden rule for that, because that's different with every article. It also depends on whether you have an experimental article, or a field study, clinical study, observational study. We've done different things like observational studies. It's probably quite different from the introduction from an experimental study. So if you write that article, just see if I was talking about the introduction. So these are the things that should be in there, basically. But this is pretty straightforward, like as being honest, you have to pose your research question, you have to know what the literature is about, what else do we have? Research question and hypothesis. Sometimes what we do is do a short introduction to the methods, but that's very short, then we say, basically this is an observational study, or this is a questionnaire study, whatever. Okay. So, but what I think is, what I always struggle with writing introductions, is that so you write your introduction, and then at one point that happens a lot with me, and I know from colleagues also that you think, okay, so what do I tell first? What do I do next? And how can I sort of take the reader by the arm so that they know enough? Because it's always difficult to, should I start with a research question? Should I start with a theoretical framework? Should I start with a societal problem? I mean, there's all different ways, and there's not a golden rule for that. But what I always do, and what I also always do with my PhD students, is say, okay, just make a draft of the introduction as you want to write it, and just do that very, very sort of quickly and broadly, like, okay, I want to tell this, and make a sort of narrative. And then we sit down, we print it out, or we hang it on the wall, and then the introduction has several paragraphs, and then we sort of circle each paragraph, and then we state, okay, so what is the essential key of this paragraph? Is that theory? Is that the existing literature? And if you do that, it helps very much. I noticed that because then you can see in that. So suppose, for instance, that you have 3 pages of introduction written, and then you circle it, and you think, what I told there. What I said in the first paragraph is basically the same as what I told in the 5th paragraph. And that happens to me a lot because I'm pretty redundant with writing. So then I think, okay, I have to shorten this, and then maybe delete the 5th paragraph and put 2 or 3 lines in the first paragraph. And this way, I mean, it's not really writing, it's more visualizing what your whole story is. I mean, a colleague of mine once told me, he said, well, writing an introduction is basically like entering a house. So you start at the doorstep, and then you open the door, and then you're in the hallway, and then you're in the living room. That's the big sort of theoretical framework of the literature that exists. And then you enter, or then you leave via the back door, and that's basically your research question and hypothesis. So, well, that's at least for me. It helps sometimes to visualize what you want to say. Having said that, then you can reorganize your introduction, and then again, and I can't say that often enough, always have it read by somebody else. I always say to my PhD students, it doesn't matter how broad it is, even if it's like 2 pages, just send it to me or send it to your colleagues, and we just comment on it, and then you can sort of rewrite it. And trust me, if I write an article, I'll probably rewrite it like 10 or 15 times. So. And there's nothing wrong with that. I mean, because you can always learn from your colleagues and other people. It's also quite fun actually, because then you think it's like And it sounds maybe odd, but it's a little bit a little baby, you know, and then you think, oh, this is such a nice baby, and then they read it and they say, I don't think it's that good, and then you sort of rewrite it, and first you think, maybe I shouldn't do that, but then always the structure is very important. And so if people read it that haven't written it like yourself, then they read through the structure and they think, there's something missing here, or there's something missing there. So I would really advise you to write it, start writing, and get all this. These are more technical aspects, so get this all in. But then, as soon as you think, I have sort of a draft, let it read by somebody else, because that really helps. And it's also, I also like it always that it's out of your desk then for a while, because if you're writing an introduction, well, you must know that it's sometimes it's so frustrating because you think, I have to go from there to there, but then I missed this step. So that's, like I said, I don't have a golden rule, but that's a way to do it.
Suppose there are some explanation that we put in the introduction and discussion, right? I mean, we repeated, but how to like make a clear distinction that this goes in introduction and this goes in the discussion part.
Yeah, that's a very good one, because, okay, first one remark, I always think that it helps enormously if you have a good introduction, because that helps you tremendously with writing a discussion as well. If you have a bad introduction, and trust me, I've done it a couple of times, then I have my results, and then I start with the discussion and I think, okay, but what did I want to research in the first place? Because it's not clear in the introduction. So a good introduction is, if you have a good introduction, the rest is basically, that sounds a bit odd, but that's way easier. And I would say, in the introduction is basically you should put stuff in that you, how does it? Okay, maybe I'll explain it differently. So most of the time you write an article if you have your results already, so you know what you found. And that's sometimes difficult because it's like being in movies and you already know the clue. So it's a bit boring actually to write an article then. But you always have to go back from your first step. So just think that you didn't know anything of the results, but what was the research question? What was the hypothesis? But also, what was the knowledge gap? So what is the literature that is already on there, on that specific topic? That should be in the introduction, and then in the discussion, I would always sort of rephrase my research question. It's always easy to get the discussion going, and then interpret your research results in relation to existing literature. So basically, in the literature that you already referred to in the intro, but it's also possible to get some extra literature. Because sometimes you have findings that, well, you didn't expect at first hand, and then there are some kind of subsidiary findings, but you still want to mention it because they're important, and then you maybe also put some extra literature references in there. But I would always say discussion is a lot about the real discussion of results, and not the hypothesis is already in the introduction, the research question is in the introduction. All that material, you can repeat it, but not overly. And that's what I mean with if you write a good introduction, what I sometimes do is that I just say, to reiterate, our research question was this. That sort of helps you to get the discussion going. And what also helps is, if you have a research question, most of the time you have 2 or 3 or 4 hypotheses. And there's also a sort of a weight in the hypotheses, so some are more, or research questions, some are more important than others. And I would also try to structure the discussion according to that. So say main findings, the most important ones first, then well, maybe less important ones, and then maybe the findings that you didn't expect, and also reflect on them. So that's sort of how you can do it. What I always see with our bachelor and master students is, and that's the so this was the introduction discussion. They have big problems with results discussion. So what do I put in the results? Results are boring in the sense that they're very interesting, but they're quite boring to write down because it's very factual, objective, no interpretation. And what I sometimes see, or pretty often actually, not sometimes, is that the students, they write down the results, and they already put some interpretation in there, and then they write the discussion, and that's basically a replication of the results. So you should really divide those two. So results are basically results, nothing more, nothing less, so no interpretation there. And discussion is interpretation of the results. So that's a completely different paragraph. There's a question in the back. So okay, that was the I wanted to say a little bit more about the results. Oh yeah, with the results, it's also, and that's again the importance of having a good introduction, because the results, I mean, sometimes you can, I don't know, you probably have read those articles as well, that you get drowned in the results, so there's like 8 pages of results, and where is this going? There's all these p-values, n-value, all that jazz. I would recommend, I mean, that's also nice for the reader, but also for yourself, to also, like you did in the introduction, structure your results session also accordingly. So, suppose that you write an article and you have 1 or 2 or 3 research questions, you have a couple of hypotheses, then also you can say in the results, like, okay, we're going to present the results from the first hypothesis first, and then present those results, and then for the other, and those results. Because then for the reader, and for the reviewer, because reviews are also important, for the reader it's easier to sort of follow also the line of the results. Because the results tend to be sometimes a bit boring. Any questions about this? Okay. Yes.
As a reviewer, what is your as a reviewer, what makes you reject? What kind of introduction that makes you reject the article?
Okay. Well, the most I think I never really rejected it, because I find that always a bit hard to do, because I know that people take a lot of work in it.
Yeah.
So I try to come up with a large review report saying, well, maybe you should have done this and that, but it takes a lot of time, let's say. What really is a basis for rejection if you didn't define the literature of it. So if you basically say, okay, I'm going to study cognitive development in children, I'm going to do this working memory task, that's it. And if you don't relate to other literature that already has done that, I know that's some of my papers got rejected about it. That's if you miss the most current state of the art of the research that you basically, the topic that you're basically working on, that's a major reason to reject papers. But then, I mean, I've had that as a reviewer, and then basically I always say, well, maybe you should look at this and this and this, these papers, and then I mean it's a relatively easy fix or relatively easy to fix that problem, because you can introduce those. Another problem is if the logical argument is not going okay, that basically the introduction is going all the way, and you're not basically coming up with a valid research question that is also testable, because that's the other thing that sometimes happens. I mean, I can think of 1,000 research questions that are really interesting, but then you need a hypothesis, because you need to know, okay, do I expect the results to go in this direction or that direction? I mean, otherwise, you can also say, I don't have a hypothesis, but then it's more like an exploratory study. So you can say, well, this is the first study in this context, blah, blah, blah. It's exploratory, therefore we don't have specific hypothesis. But that's a little bit of a tricky one, because then the results speak for themselves, and then the discussion can sometimes be difficult, because then the results go this way but not that way. But why is that? So if you have a strong research question and hypothesis, that really helps a lot. The other thing is, if your methods are flawed, so if you didn't use the right methods, or your study is underpowered, so you don't have a lot of don't have enough participants. I have to say, in all honesty, I've had that a couple of times that they say the study is underpowered, but I do quite a lot of research with children's policy, children development nation, so we, most of the time we have not huge samples. It's not like we have 400 participants there. And I'm always getting a bit, I think I say that, pissed off with my reviewers that say that, because then I say, okay, well, maybe it's underpowered, but still, we not only report p-values, but also the effect sizes. And I think there's more and more in the literature, more and more accepted that p-values are okay, but effect sizes are actually much more important. Because if you have in the old terms, an underpowered study, say for instance, I just as an example, I do a study, I have my hypotheses, and p-values, all that jazz, and then I calculate, I do power calculation, and turns out I need 100 participants, and then I have only 80 participants. Well, what do? Do you basically say, well, okay, it's underpowered, so I'm not going to write about it? I don't think so. So what we normally do is say, okay, this study might look underpowered, and depends a little bit on the review, I have to say, if they take it enough. But then we report the effect sizes, because effect sizes are somewhat more informative than p-values, because p-values are basically also based on the power calculation. And with the effect sizes, you say, well, okay, I know I only have 80 participants, but given the effect size, if you have 200, this will be a big p-value. So I know that a lot of journals these days are more and more into reporting the effect size, which I think is a very good thing. So you all know what the effect sizes is, or because I don't know. Yeah, probably. Yeah. Any other questions? Otherwise, I'll just see where I'm at. This is typically my presentation. You go.
That's okay.
First off.
One of the major issues when writing introduction for me is building a strong argument, because there's an existing knowledge and then there's a gap, and then we must propose the new theoretical to fulfill this gap. I think it's hard for me to write a convincing argument that what we offer is something that valuable and can maybe fulfill this knowledge gap. How to build like a strong argument for this.
Okay, what I would do, I completely agree, because that is the most difficult part, because okay, let's say sometimes we've got experiments, and then you do the experiments, and then you read the literature and you think, I think this has already been done. No, and it's not nice to read. But anyway, there's always, you can always twist it. I mean, for instance, replication is a big thing in science these days. So suppose you've done a study and you have a theory, you've done an empirical study, and you think it's not really a knowledge gap where I'm in, but I'm basically replicating a study. That's also okay, because replication is extremely important in science, because there's too many studies these days that have that sort of think they have to do something new, so they do all new things, and then if you replicate some of those studies, then you find out that the evidence is not that strong. So I'm pretty much in favor of replication studies. Having said that, I think you should, so if you have your research question, what I always do is go in the, well, I use Web of Science or Scopus or whatever database kind of thing there is. One of the best things to do is to say, okay, for instance, okay, as an example. So I leave it a little bit close to my own field. So motor disorders, working memory development. Suppose that I have a study on that and I think, oh, this is really good study and this is really good research. Then I put those keywords in Web of Science or whatever database you use. And then I also add systematic review. And the nice thing about that is people write so many, especially in COVID times, there were so many reviews because people couldn't do any experiments. So I And the library is pretty patient, so everybody did. We also did 5 reviews or something. But with a review study, it's always nice because then if you put the keywords in, and then you look, and then you get a couple of hits like review studies, then you see what the state of the art of that, so it helps you a little bit like sort of finding out where is the knowledge gap and what are the things that need to be studied. If you have a good review study, they also say at the end like, okay, but these are the things that should be studied. And that's, if you want to do the lazy way, you just say, okay, this is what I want to study. I have this idea. I put it in Web of Science or whatever I use, and then look for a systematic review. Read the last paragraph because there's always they say that, okay, but we need to study this or that. And then you do it. But that's a very, I wouldn't recommend it. That's a very lazy way of doing it. But I think there's always there's a lot. I mean, there's a lot of new things to discover. I mean, replication sounds like it's not new, but it's extremely important. Like for the reason I said before. I mean, there is hardly any study that is the same. So always the context is different. We sometimes we work with a group in Czechoslovakia in Europe, and they collected data, we collected data, and then we said, well, it's a bit funny, but it's a trans-European study. No one has done that before, and it's a bit phony, but there's always something you can actually find. I mean, there's always a little twist. But I recommend, because there is reviewers that will look at it very closely, of course. I would recommend scan literature very thoroughly securely. So get the good keywords in and know what you have to know the state of the art in that topic. That's very important. Yeah. Does that answer your question? Very well. Any other questions? Okay, I just go through my. Oh, that's okay. Yeah. So now we come to the most. Hey, this strange. Okay. Oh yeah, I start. Okay. I'm looking at my lens over here. There's something going on. Oh man.
Sorry to make you confused.
Okay. So methods. So, like you said, you started off with the method, which I think is very smart to do. Method it's a bit boring, it's a bit bland, you can say, and there has to be a couple of things in there. So the procedures that you follow, and what I said in answer to your question. Also, you have to describe the procedures in such a way that if I read your study and I want to replicate it, I need to be able to replicate it under the same circumstances. So I have to know how did you recruit your participants, how old were your participants, all the demographics of the participants, but also the methods like what did you exactly do. For instance, if you do an experimental study, how many blocks were there, was it random practice, block practice, all those kind of things. You have to really be precise in reporting that, because one thing of writing an article and reading it is replication. Materials and tools, participant recruitment. Sometimes, are you doing clinical studies a lot? No, because sometimes in clinical, we've done some clinical studies, and then your participant recruitment is quite a big piece actually. If we do experimental studies with students, we just say, okay, we have students from the canteen and we did the study. But with the clinical group, you have to describe really into some depth. Like, okay, how to describe the clinical group? How old are they? What are the clinical signs? Are they doing mostly this and that? And that's a big part of the method. So every method section, there's not a sort of general method section. It depends on your study. If you do an experimental study with a lot of experimental variations, then you have to describe that very good. Another thing which is also important is get your ethics. So you need to have ethical approval here as well, isn't it? Yeah. Is that difficult here or?
Not so difficult. Not so difficult. Around two weeks until 1 month. Actually,
That's good. Yeah, because you get a number.
Yeah.
Yes. So that's very important because we had one study that was rejected because we didn't have a number of the ethical approval. And this was a couple of years ago when it wasn't still that important to have it, but then it's sort of, so this is more than 10 years ago. I mean, when I started off, I worked in the clinic for a while, and I could just look in files and just do study, and people didn't have to sign ethical approval. So it was a different way back then. But nowadays you have to, which I think is good by the way, you have to get ethical approval for your study, and you have to write down the number that you get from the faculty or university. And also sometimes if we do large survey studies that involve more than a couple of thousand people, you have to put in the data management plan. So where do you store? I think most of the studies. So where do you store your data? Who can access the data? Is it secure? Blah 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 blah. And I think I'm not totally sure, but I think you have to store the raw data for at least 10 years or so that people, because okay, I'll just tell you something else. That people can replicate your study, and sometimes I've had questions from people that did a meta-analysis, so they want to have a look at the raw data. So they ask me, okay, can you, from those studies, can you give me the raw data so we can do a meta-analysis, which is nice, but you need to have the raw data. We just had, just before I left Nijmegen, which was 1 or 2 weeks ago, and I'm Vice Dean of Research, and we had a big case of fraud actually in Nijmegen. So there was one researcher that basically made up his data. So we said, okay, let's look at the data management plan, and let's look at the raw data and where have you stored it. And there was no raw data not stored, so that it was, and this is big in use now in the Netherlands, so that's a bad thing actually. And I think it's good to store your raw data, because sometimes we've had one study that after 5 years we did another experiment. We thought, let's look at that data again, but now from the perspective of let's try and see if we can find something like this and that. So it's always good to have your raw data stored in a safe place, which is secure and all that.
Bert, I think nowadays we are encouraged to start our data in open science framework.
Yeah, that's good. I think it's good. Yeah, open science framework also gets me. I mean, this more about publishing. So, do you here adhere to the open access journals, or do you say, well, doesn't matter where you publish it? Because in the Netherlands now, we're almost not allowed anymore to publish in, I always call it closed journals, so journals that are not publicly available. I don't know how you have them here. It's not.
Is it a predatory journal or open access, all of open access?
Yeah, well, the thing is,
Not the subscription.
yeah, the thing is, okay, maybe I should explain a little bit better. So, in the old days, you had those big publishing groups, and so the university had to buy subscriptions to the publishers. Extremely expensive. It was just a very bad business model. Well, for them it was a good business model, but anyway. So then a lot of research in the Netherlands, but also worldwide, they said, okay, well, this is odd. So these publishers, they publish articles of researchers that is paid by, researchers are paid by public money. Then there is this review process, and it's done by researchers voluntarily. And basically the publishers, I wish I would have been in the publishing area. I would have retired already, because they make heaps of money with that. I mean, the only thing they provide basically is a sort of platform. So, and then the other thing was that because it was in the library of the universities, these articles weren't publicly available. So if, for instance, my neighbor says, what kind of research do you do? It's in that journal. Yeah, I can't access it because I don't have an account. So years ago, a lot of universities went to the publishers and said, well, this is not a good way to do it. We want open access. And I can tell stories about it. basically it boils down to money. So these publishers just want to see money, and the universities, well, weren't very funny. So what they then said is, okay, what we do, we have open access journals. So you're not paying, the university is not paying a subscription for the journal, but if you submit an article and it gets published, you pay an article fee. But basically it's the same because they get a lot of money anyway. But, yeah, I mean, I have a lot of discussions about it. So people are very happy, oh, it's open access now. Yeah, but now you don't pay up front, you pay after. Yeah.
Pay later.
Yeah, and there are some really bad open access journals, which are basically what we call it, business models. So basically they set up a platform, and we as scientists are stupid enough to do our own research, do our own review, write the articles, and then submit it there. And the only advantage is that if your neighbor wants to see your article, he can see it because it's publicly available. And our university is more like they say, well, we need the open framework, but we also need open access articles. But I'm not entirely sure if it's dealing with this whole business model of publishing. But that's more a private thing. Okay. So any questions? What time is it? 2.
Just a little 30 is fine.
Yes, fine. You want to have a break? Are you tired or?
I think you
You're
are
bored.
tired since in the morning, right?
Sorry?
You are tired indeed
No,
because
I can
starting
go
in the
on,
morning
I
you
can
teach
go on way.
bachelor degree.
This coffee helping big time.
Okay.
No, but if you want to have a break or what's normal, you take a break or you can just, is it okay to proceed or? Yeah, okay. I don't have a lot more to tell. You let me know.
Okay.
My wife always says, yeah, that's what you always say, and then I'm stuck with you for the rest of my life. Okay, so results. I think I said already about results, so get a clear structure in there as well. Try to avoid that your results are just one blur of a lot of p-values, n-values, all those kind of things, because you always have to keep in mind the reader that wants an interesting article to read. So do that. So results only, no discussion, and tables and figures. That's one thing. I like tables and figures a lot. That's because I'm too lazy to read sometimes. But you have to avoid putting the same stuff in the table that you put in the text, and then also put it in the figure. Also, the other thing is, if you have things that are not significant, then don't put them in a figure, because it's a figure about no results. And I mean, I think always the most interesting figures are the interaction effects, where you can see, okay, this effect is, so that's what you should put in the figures, and don't make too many figures. Also look at the journal guidelines, how many figures are allowed, how many tables are allowed, those kind of things. But tables are typically, if you do a clinical study with demographics of the clinical sample, then you get a table. So you say age, gender, diagnosis, all those things. So that's what get in the result. Discussion, I already said a little bit about this, but I'm going to repeat some of it. So, research question and hypothesis. I think, so that basically, so what I said in the beginning, if you have a good introduction, it helps you also structure the discussion. Yeah. And sometimes what I do myself is then, I sort of repeat my research question of the introduction and say, this study was about this and this, that's a very first paragraph. Then you get to the results or the main findings and your main hypotheses and interpret those findings. If you've done that, you've written the discussion section, then it's also fine to leave the first paragraph out. So sometimes I just write sort of connecting small paragraphs for myself, just to get the flow in the article, and then I know, okay, where am I going? And then I print it out, I look at it and I think, okay, if I leave this out, does it harm my argumentation? No. Okay, leave that out. So sometimes it helps I always use the phrase, I always like that, like, this begs the question as to, and you can ask, okay, who's begging this question? Well, it's me, but it sort of helps you to say, okay, wow, and that's why we research this and that. So sometimes these lines help yourself writing the article, but don't be afraid to delete them later on, because that's also fine. But just read if the argumentation is okay then. So structured discussion, as I said already, it's about interpretation of results, preferably related to the difference between intro and discussion. So try to get your knowledge base in order, so know what the state of the art of the literature is, and interpret your findings in terms of theoretical frameworks or empirical evidence or replication, all that. Oh yeah, that's also important contribution to the field, and that's what I mean with that is, so we also do clinical studies, educational studies, sometimes we do studies for the council with policy studies, and then they always want to know, okay, but yeah, nice those research questions, but what does it add to our knowledge base for clinical practitioners, or for instance for policy workers, and that. So you can also add that in the discussion. That's the other one. And the last one, I put down limitations in further research, but I always say to my students, never put down limitation is always a bit negative, I think. I would rather say outlook. So basically, if you put down limitations, sometimes I see that with master students, because they are a bit insecure about their work, and then they have a discussion, say that the discussion is 5 pages. There's 2 pages of discussion of the results, and there's 3 pages of limitations. Yeah, but they're a bit insecure. And I mean, I can imagine that because they say, it's a small study, and it's this and that. Because it's a small. And then I say, well, I don't call it limitations. Basically, you discovered something which can be based, sort of a knowledge base for further research. So I always like further research or outlook on new research instead of limited. You can say, well, for instance, with an under-power study, you can say, well, and you have to well, this study showed with even a relatively small number of participants that the effect sizes are large. So this demands further study in larger populations. That's it. That's a little bit tricky. Okay. So that's the discussion. Then references. Yeah. How are we going to get from one?
If we have a rejected hypothesis, how far we plan the argument in the discussion?
Yeah. I would, well, I mean, okay, here's a little anecdote. So a couple of years ago, we have a printer at our faculty. There was a student that had like, I think 20 pages printed with results, and she only looked at the significant results. And I said, well, that's interesting, but the non-significant results can be as interesting as the significant results. The thing is now with the whole progression towards effect sizes, non-significant results are more appreciated than they were like 15 years ago, which I think is good because I've had in the early days, I've had reviews that said, oh yeah, you have non-significant results because your study is underpowered, or your methods aren't good. It's a very easy stick to, you say, you can always find a stick to beat the dog, but that's expression. But anyway, so non-significant results are important to also report. Having said that, I mean, if your whole discussion is about non-significant results, I wouldn't do that because that's a bit like, then it's a bit tricky, I think. So I mean, I've had studies that we basically didn't find anything, and some of those studies we didn't even want to publish because that's difficult to get it published. No, we didn't write. No. But having said that, there are, I know, it just gets to my mind, there have been journals with the title, the Journal of Non-Significant Results. Because, yeah, and it sounds a bit funny, but it's just because people are always so fixated on significant results, key values, and those kind of things. Whereas not everything is significant. I mean, sometimes your hypothesis is rejected. That's just as important as that your hypothesis is accepted. And I know that I know one guy who was editor there, and the journal actually ceased to exist because there were a lot of researchers that didn't want to be affiliated with non-results. So that's I mean, it's a bit sad, but I think it's important. But don't put your discussion full of non-results, because I think that's all right. Then, oh yeah.
I want to know your opinion about the goodness of it, the model fit. How do you think about it? Is it still relevant nowadays, or is still important? Like RMC, SAA, or CFI, TI, something like that. Is it still used?
So, in what context do you? Yeah, I know.
For example, if the research is about the model,
Yeah.
and we found out, maybe for example, the result, the model, not all of the model fit.
Yeah.
So, how do you think? Because when I learned in first term, there's what is standard for the model fit, but if we found that maybe one of them not fit, is it okay? Is still we can use to publish it, or there's some like a strict standard for it?
I mean, I'm always of the opinion that if it doesn't fit, it doesn't fit. So the results, I mean, if your methods are solid and all those kind of things, so you have to be sure that your methods are okay. But if it doesn't fit, then that's a result. And I would never say, well, don't publish it, because, like I said, I mean, non-significant results are also results. And I've seen models that over the years that there are sort of an increasing number of empirical studies showing a very poor fit, and that at the end the developer of the method said, okay, I'm going to, based on the progressive evidence, I'm going to reject my model, or not reject, but I'm going to adjust my model. So I think that's also science. You know, it's also progression in science that so people come up with different models, which are never perfect. I mean, there's context in which the model doesn't fit, context where the model probably fits, and so I think that's good to publish it, because I think it helps progression in science. Because at the end of the day, we want to have good theoretical models and good empirical evidence supporting those models. Yeah, so I think it helps science.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you, Professor Bert, for inspiring presentation, which is really relevant to all of our group. My question is, well, in here at the Psychology Universitas Indonesia, we are obliged to publish 3 articles in a reputable journals. And my question is, please share your experience or tips when you have big one research. How do you divide it into 3 publications so you don't plagiarize yourself? I'm now struggling with writing my first draft of publication, but at the same time I'm also thinking what to write for the 2 other journals or more, so your tips or from your experience. Thank you.
Do you, so one maybe positive question, so do you have one big database and you want to publish 3 articles about that database, or do you want just 3 separate articles?
different articles from one database.
From one database. Oh yeah,
From
yeah.
big research.
Yeah, so that happens a lot actually. We've seen that, for instance, with doing systematic reviews, and then you come out with all the studies. It's the same lab again with that research, with that article. It's the same lab. So people do it all the time. I think, and there's nothing wrong with it because I think actually it's good because if you collect large databases, and we sometimes actually use databases from other universities because they already collected the data. So why bother doing it yourself? I think the thing, the key here is that you need to have 3 articles with each of them, 3 research questions that are relatively unique and hypotheses that are relatively unique. So if say you have a database and you're publishing the first article and your second article is basically more or less the same, that probably doesn't work. But I would, but if you have a large database, then there's so many questions you can basically answer with the analysis of that database. But then again, it boils down to your introduction. So what is the research question you want to have? And that's of course up to yourself, like what do you want to research. But there's nothing, I've seen that, I mean, we actually do that. We have quite large databases that we collected and now sort of laying backwards and saying, okay, let's look at the database and what kind of articles do we want to publish about it? What are the research questions we have? Okay, let's go into the database, do some analyses, etc. But they have to be, they can follow up on each other. That's also fine. That's not a problem. I mean, if you say, well, I found out here. An example of that. Oh yeah, for instance, we've done some studies on active living in the population, what kind of things people do and blah blah blah. So there was one article about okay, people do these activities, those activities, but then we saw that there was a sociologist in our team, and he said, I see a lot of differences between groups. So people with no, as they have no socio-economic, we call it, but also gender differences. So that can be the second paper. So your first paper, our first paper was like, okay, these kind of activities people do, and they are active during the day. That was more general. And then the follow-up paper, probably, I don't know what they're working on now, but probably they will look at gender differences, differences in SES. And that's a nice one actually in the sense that you can go to the same journal and say in your the letter you write to the editor, like, okay, we want to submit a paper. You say, well, the other paper was already accepted, this is a follow-up. And they can sometimes help with publication.
Maybe this is a bit out of context, but I'm curious, do you have an unwritten rule for sorting the co-authors? Because sometimes we have a lot of co-authors, and is it solely because of the level of contribution? But sometimes we have like the 4th and the 5th and the 6th have the same contribution. Do you have like as experienced researcher? Do you have tips for this?
Most of my experience were really good with that. I had one bad experience, but I'll explain that. So what we have as a standard rule is that what people doctoral students we call, well, like I said, PhD students, but that's basically what you are. I always say PhD students first, because they have to write a thesis and blah blah blah. So they're always, because they do the research, they do the most work basically. PhD students are always the first. At least that's what I do, and I think most of my colleagues also do that. And I think that also values their contribution, and I think it's really important for them. And then it depends a little bit on the research team. Sometimes, if I know it's going to be trouble, before we start research, I say, okay, who wants to contribute, and what is the order of authors? And it depends a little bit on the field you're publishing in. So first author is, of course, always the most important one. Sometimes we share authorships, that is also possible, so they contribute equally. That's what we sometimes do. But then it depends on the field where you're in, if you want to be last author or second author. So I think in the medical field, the second author is very important. That's basically the lead of the lab, leads of the head of the program, the head of the research group. if you go into social sciences, it's always the last person that is the head of this. So it sounds weird, but I'm always the last, which I'm fine with. And then in between, it basically doesn't matter how way you're in between. No, really, I mean, but I always say, I mean, I sometimes, the other way around, I sometimes get asked by people that say, oh, this nice article, but can you read the final draft of it? And then we want to submit it. And then I don't know anything about research, wasn't involved in the research question or whatever. And then you can be a co-author, but I never do it because I think that's what they call it a freebie. So you basically write the final draft and you get some comments and you get paid. I don't like that, but I know that some people do that. But I think the first and the last and probably the second are the most important position on the paper. And if you feel insecure about it, I would just, that's what we sometimes do, we just say before we've even done the research, we just say, okay, if we write an article, okay, what is the order of the authors? And for me, there's no negotiation that, for me, my PhD is always first. Or they have to do a really bad job, and I've never experienced that. So that's for me always the most important thing. If I'm last, yeah, sometimes I'm last, sometimes if other people need it, and I mean, yeah, this sounds really old, but if you're sort of, so you're probably all sort of early career and mid-career, then the publication is important, and also where you are on the publication is important. I had that also when I was younger. For me, yeah, it sounds good also. For me, it's not that important anymore. I mean, so I'm also happy if somebody says to me, well, can I be the last author? I'm fine. But I mean, I don't know that not everybody is like that. But it's good to make sort of agreements before. If you, yeah, I never work without. I never work. I always trust people, but I've been disappointed sometimes. I've disappointed. That's the example I wanted to mention. There was one person, one senior researcher. I was still young then, and then we did all the research, and a PhD of mine did all the research, and then he wasn't doing anything basically, and then we had the final draft, and he came up to my office and he said, I want to be first author. Yeah, I mean, I'm pretty friendly, but I can be a straight head. And I said, well, that's not going to happen. And he was quite senior, actually. He was a pretty good scientist. He said, yeah, but I think it's unethical to come up and then say, I need to be the first author, and based on your authority. But well, that probably differs where you are. I mean, I know some institutes in the Netherlands are pretty hierarchical. In Nijmegen, we're pretty socialistic, laid back, so, yeah. Well, I mean, I know from so I work at Radboud University, and we also have a medical center, Radboud University Medical Center. Oh, they're pretty hierarchical there. It's the prof that, this is an anecdote, but I'm just telling you, but it's the prof that is the most important person on earth, basically. And it's funny, but it's so funny, if I'm at Radboud University, and I have a meeting with colleagues there on Bert, not like my first name, but if I'm at Radboud University Medical Hospital, I'm Professor Steenbergen. I mean, I'm just a person. I mean, it doesn't, but that's pretty hierarchical there. Yeah.
But how about the corresponding author? Belong to the student or belong to the
Sorry?
corresponding author?
Normally we do that with the PhD, but I had sometimes that my PhDs were already, well, in our system, PhD is an employer, so it's not a student, but he or she is an employee for 4 or 5 years. So sometimes the employment period is ending, and then they already have another job, but still have 2 publications in progress, so they submit it and revise it. And then I always say, if you like it, you can put me on as a corresponding author, because I'm always there, basically. I'm always at the same university. But sometimes they say, no, I want to be corresponding author, and that's also okay, but then you have to make sure that they have the same email, that they really can correspond to you. And that's what sometimes happens with our PhD students if they're in the final year and they go to another job, they lose their email, and then the email is still on the corresponding author site. So yeah, that's a bit odd. Yeah.
I have two questions. The first one is what you write down there is the contribution to the field possible variations that you put it on the discussion part. But where the journal that I aimed for, the sample of article, the author put the implication and contribution in the conclusion part. So which one is better or?
Yeah, I don't think it's a better one. I think, again, it also, I mean, journals these days have their own sort of guidelines, and some journals really like you to do a final paragraph with conclusions, and you can put it there. Some journals also say, okay, we need a paragraph about limitation and further research or clinical implication. So it depends a bit on the journal. If the journal is like, okay, this is the very basic paragraph, like I said at the beginning, I would put it somewhere at the end then. And it's never wrong to end with something with paragraph, because I know readers are also lazy, and then I refer to myself. I read the abstract and the intro, and I think, probably done well. Result, believe it, and then I go to the discussion, and sometimes only the end. So, like, what is the interpretation? So there's no either or way, I think.
Okay, and the next one is the use of AI in writing journals.
Yeah.
I myself use the AI because my first language is not English, so sometimes I make them the AI to, let's say, make the paragraph containing this. I made the draft first, and the ChatGPT or the cloud arrange paragraph. But for me, sometimes what the AI wrote is not me. I mean, it's too clever. I mean, my English is not that good, but I still need the data center everything. So,
yeah, I recognize it completely, because English is also not my first language. I mean, yeah, no, really, and sometimes you struggle with like, oh man, how do you put it out? And the funny thing is another anecdote, but I work quite a lot with Australian Catholic University in Melbourne, and then I wrote a couple of articles, and then I sent it to them, to my colleague there, and I'm like, oh man, this is good English, and it's all random, and it's all wrong, and then I think, oh yeah, we call it Dinglish, Dutch English. So it's basically you translate Dutch and English, which is a bit of, yeah, that's what happened. I mean, so my colleague in Australia always said, well, your English is better than my Dutch, so whatever, you know. But AI, I think, I think that's also something. I mean, it's a sort of progression there. So, for instance, our Dutch Research Council, if we do a grant proposal, it is allowed to use AI if you mention what you used it for. But I think at the end it's always your own argumentation. But I'm actually currently writing a research grant, and then sometimes I have to make very boring a governance model. So how do you in your project, how do you governance and this and that? I just went to AI and I said, give me a good governance model. And then I read it and I get inspired, and then I read it. But I think also with journals, I mean, I'm not an expert in AI. I mean, actually I'm very naive, but I know that there are journals, there are apps that actually can check if you've used AI in your text. So that's funny, because you have AI to make the text different, and then there's other apps that check if AI is used. And I think it's, I mean, it's the same as with the start of the mobile phone. Some people are really opposed to it. Well, I mean, everybody has a mobile these days, and even yesterday I thought, oh shit, there's no mobile. That was really panicking. Well, okay, so this is what a mobile does to you, you know? But that's with AI as well. I think, it's just a progression. But I think I would use it as an aid, so as a help. And that's the same with, I use Google Translate sometimes. Yeah, all those things. I mean, it just helps, but I never completely copy paste it because that's just, that's not. We're almost there. And now for the important part. References is just use EndNote or another tool and it'll be fine. The only thing what I said at the beginning, if you're writing the article and you know what the literature is about and you're searching for a journal, and then you also do what kind of articles you refer to, specific journals that you have more, that you refer to more. It's probably a journal that's interesting. Okay, basically you said it here already. So, proofreading. I mean, so don't be shy to think. I mean, so the first concept is never good. That's basically it. The second is neither. Maybe the 15 is probably getting there, but I mean, always have other people read your article. That's always good, and it's also sometimes a bit scary. Like I said with my Australian colleague, that I get it back and he's like, oh man, your English is so bad. But then he said, oh, we're going to make it real. And he said, that's only grammar. But the argumentation also, sometimes it helps if you have other people reading it. Allow revision, so don't be shy to say, okay, you know. And the last thing is also interesting because normally what you do, you have the article before you submit it, read by some colleagues or something. It's also good to have it read by one or two persons that are completely not in your field, because they look at different things, and they look at the argumentation maybe a little bit more than what you do, because if you're in the field, you're so focused on the way this way, and that's also fun because they come up with other kind of things than you do. Okay, and then of course submit it. It's always nice if you click the button and submit. But before you're there, it's a long way. Select your journal, I already said, oh yeah, what you have to do, and I think it's best if you start with writing an article, try to pick as soon as possible articles where you want to publish, because then these days articles all have their own guidelines, author guidelines, and sometimes they differ a lot between journals. And it's a bit of a pity to get there one time. We wrote an article that was like 6,000 words, and then we wanted to submit it, but the journal allowed 3,500 words. So, yeah, that's a big thing actually. And then submit it there. Always have that. So we always also send a letter to the editor. So. Yeah, the editor to submit this paper. It sometimes helps if you say we submit a paper to this journal for this and this reason, because then the editor might, and I know a couple of editors that are very susceptible for that, because then they know, okay, they thought it why they can submit the article here, and yeah, it fits with our the purpose of our journal. So that might help. And then wait for the reviews. That can be a painful thing. And one thing, so we also always have a running joke. So most of the time you get 3 reviews, and it's also it's always the third review that is negative. I don't know why that is. Maybe they have sort of AI tool for that, but it's always really the first review you think, oh, it's not too bad. Second review, oh, it's not too bad. Then you get the third review. This is no done. Don't be disappointed too much. I mean, like, especially your first paper, it sounds a bit odd, but it's just a little baby. I mean, you work on it for a year or so, and then you submit it, and then you get it back, and then the reviews are negative. And that's, I mean, I still have that. If I get my papers rejected, I'm always getting frustrated, and I go for a run, and then it's okay. It's always a bit disappointing, because you've done the research, mostly you've done the research in the team, of course, and you think, we've done some good work, we have good methods, it's the research. So, and I just wrote down that my very first paper got rejected by 6 journals. So I have to go over and over again, submit it again. And then the 7th journal said, this is really interesting. So, and I think actually, in retrospect, I think we submitted to the wrong journal because it was, was a study which fitted with the ecological psychology line, and we submitted it to journals that were really opposed to the ecological psychology line. So Dre rejected it, and then we submitted it to, I think the journal was called Ecological Psychology, and they said, oh man, this is good. But they accepted it finally. So don't be too disappointed. Then you have the review reports, carefully read them, and just lay them aside for 2 days, because sometimes they can be a bit harsh. And prepare a revision. What you do with the revision, what we always do, is make sort of an itemized response letter. So normally what happens is you get reviews, and they give point-by-point comments on your paper. We always make a very long, if you call it a rebuttal, no, not rebuttal, letter for revision, and then you just point out, okay, the review is this, and we change this in the text, then and that, and then put the page number and the line there as well. So make it easy for the review. And also, one thing I always say to my PhD students, put a big pot of honey next to you and do it to the amount of the review. So appreciate the reviews, thank them for the time. And of course, I mean, I'm also a reviewer. It takes time to if you want to do a good review of a paper, it probably takes you a day or maybe more. So if you, I mean, I've had some reviews that was extremely good and really helped us to improve the paper. So, and it's your scientific context. Some can be harsh though. I mean, yeah. So good response letter, thank the reviewers for their time, and then, well, finally, well, you already had the pleasure. The paper is accepted. I always celebrate. I had. This is okay. My final anecdote. I had a PhD some time ago, and he so what we call external PhD. So he was not an employee of our university, but he had his own. Well, he had a couple of businesses in the fitness industry, and he wanted to look at adherence in fitness clubs. There was this and theory change, blah blah. There. But he was, I think he was a millionaire, to be honest. First meeting I had with him, he put his key on the table, was a big BMW, and I thought, okay, what is this? But he was very good. And he said, well, I know every time I get my paper accepted, I take you to a very Michelin-star restaurant. So that was one of my best PhDs because I had 4 good tenants in a Michelin-star restaurant. Not that you have to do that, but you need to. I think what we sometimes forget is, so if you're in the scientific arena, it's always like, if you do presentation, oh, this is not good, you can tweak that a little bit, but you also have to appreciate your own success. I think it's good to do every now and then, because that's something we forget about. We're a little bit too critical to each other, and I mean, it's a big endeavor to get a paper published. So I think that's about. I talked a lot, isn't it?
So from the body. Thank you, Bert. Do you have a question?
I hope it was of use.
It is.
Yeah, I have more. This is regarding the number of words in the article. The journal that I in, the guidelines for articles stated that there is no limit on the number of hours. Is it really true for that kind of journals who stated that there are no number of limits? But because sometimes the reviewer who asks to limit the number of words, and I have myself struggled to, let's say, to make the sentence as effective as it can and to the point.
Yeah.
I start to
I think there's 2 things. So there are journals that say, well, you can use as many words as you like, and these are probably also open access journals because they don't print anymore. So
so they have open access and
okay.
subscription.
Okay. But then that is true. but you also have to realize that your journal, your paper gets read by reviewers. And I mean, I review sometimes papers, but I wouldn't be happy reviewing a paper of 100 pages. That's a bit too much. So I would never take it too large. I mean, and I think there are actually very good AI tools to do it. I mean, I don't use them, but a colleague of mine used it. I had to also decrease a lot of words. And he said, "Oh, watch," and he decreased it, and with an AI tool, but still, yeah, basically you got rid of all what I call from my own article the rubbish. So basically stuff that you don't need. So I would never go into very complete articles. It's also, they have a saying, I know you know German here, I guess, or there's a saying in German, in the Beschränkung zeigt sich den Meister, and that's basically saying, you can see the master, a master reveals himself in the shortage of his note. So basically, if you are able to tell a story in 10 pages, then that's better than telling it in 5 or 50 pages. But if you're not sure, what we sometimes do is just mail the editor and ask him. Or, I mean, it's always mail address. Just one more note. So if you think I don't agree or I still have questions, I just refer you to Don, and he will. So if you have a question, you can always mail me. But then he has my email address. If you're okay with that. Now, suppose if you say, because normally I have it always with the English mind, but if I listen to presentations, then only after 2 hours it's digested a little bit, and I think, what he was telling wasn't true. Yeah, so anyway.
Thank you, Bert.
Thank
So
you.
we have actually provided a consultation session for individual or very small group for all of you, maybe who would like to discuss this group further on Thursday afternoon and Wednesday morning. Good morning. Yes. That's the slots only there. Okay. So please inform to Maika and then we will arrange for you. Okay. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Akan ditutup Pak Dewi.